Number 1. I am now at a gas station at Autobahn 7 near Wurzburg, Germany, trying to get out of this country. The truckers and other late night drivers are probably thinking I'm crazy, typing so fast on my phone. But I'm not, and you must believe me. Let me tell you why I'm leaving. And no, it's not for political reasons or that someone threatened me with a gun. In fact, it would have been better if someone had threatened me with a gun, because that would make this situation a lot better. So let me start from the beginning. It all started last Wednesday. I was walking to my local grocery store. It was very early, around 6 a.m. I had forgot to buy breakfast last night, so I had to buy it today. While I was walking, I got the feeling like I was being watched. I've had that feeling since my childhood, just like everyone. I looked around, but there was no one. Of course, I kept walking, but a little later I had the feeling again. This time I looked again, and I saw a silhouette diving into a small street. Because it was dark, I thought it was a cat, and when I heard a trash can fall over, I was sure it was a cat. My town has problems with cats throwing over trash cans all the time. I bought some bread and cheese and went home. When I was unlocking the door, I had the feeling again. I looked around, scared this time, and I saw my neighbor's cat looking at me, cursing at myself for being scared of a cat. The day went on as normal. I worked, ordered a pizza, watched football, and went to bed around 10:30. I'm a heavy sleeper, and I usually go through the night, but this time I woke up around 2 a.m. I woke up Lila, my golden retriever, to cuddle. I always do that when I wake up late at night. She's soft and helps me relax. Usually she would wake up and come on my bed, where we would cuddle and maybe even play if I can't sleep. But tonight she started growling at the door. I always have the door open and the bathroom light on because I'm afraid of the dark. I looked through the door and saw a shape running away. Layla now looked very pleased with herself, as if she had hunted a burglar. The shadow freaked me out, but I was more freaked out about Layla. The shadow could have been a trick of the light, but that Layla, a golden retriever, one of the most peaceful dogs in the world, it would lick a thief as an example, didn't run cheerfully towards it, but instead growled at it. I didn't sleep anymore. I just played video games the rest of the night. The next night, Lila was at my aunt's house because my little cousin absolutely loves her. I had a normal day again, but that night I woke up at 1 a.m. I shot up like I had a nightmare, although I don't recall one. Now immediately looked at the door and again saw the shadow running away. I now tried to sleep, but I couldn't, so I got in my car and drove around without any destination. The next two nights were exactly the same, but the fifth night, the last night, the worst thing ever happened. Layla had just returned home, and I was happy again. That day was as normal as usual, but the night, I was sleeping and again woke up at 2 a.m. But now, not because of a nightmare that I couldn't remember, but from Layla barking aggressively. I looked at the door and there it was, a pitch black creature with big white eyes and no mouth just staring at me. I grabbed my phone to take a photo because someone had told me if you ever encounter something supernatural, don't try to fight it, but take a picture, and that's how they get scared. It sounded like complete horse crap to me, but it was my only hope of saving myself and Lila. The minute my screen lit up, the creature ran away. I felt so relieved I immediately fell asleep. The next day I put my house up for sale and told the real estate company to sell it to the first person that wanted it. I packed all my stuff except for the furniture and got into my car. I went to all my friends and family in the area and told them I was moving to follow a study. That night, I locked my door for the last time, and when I looked up, I saw the creature staring at me from my window. I got to my car as fast as I could and just took off. For those of you wondering, me and Layla are okay. We're drinking coffee and she's here with me. We are on our way to Austria to hopefully stay with some of my friends. If this thing has followed me, you'll be the first to know. Let's hope it doesn't. Number 2. My grandfather is 95 years old. and not long to be in this world. There's nothing but a mess of tubes and wires to tether him here with us. It's difficult for him to speak, but each rasping whisper carries a severe weight that cannot be interrupted. My family doesn't like to talk about things like death, though, so whenever I visit my dad, we tend to spend most of the time sitting in near silence. What a news week, huh? My dad might say. My grandfather will grunt. Crazy world. Then silence again. Small talk seems almost disrespectful to the gravity of the situation, but no one wants to be the first one to broach the irrevocable goodbye. When the silence gets too loud, my dad will start to fidget with his phone or pull out a book until one of us make an excuse to leave. That's how it went yesterday, with my father mumbling something about a dentist appointment and hurrying out the door almost as soon as we arrived. You'll stay, won't you? My grandfather said when we were alone in the room together. You'll listen to an old man's last secret, won't you? This was it then. The end of the road was in sight. Would you like me to call back my dad? I asked. My grandfather shook his head as far as the oxygen tubes would allow him to turn. I'd rather he didn't know. I already knew some of the stories he had told me. It began when my grandfather was 20 years old living in Nazi Germany. He'd been working forced labor on a farm, but managed to smuggle my grandmother and infant father out of the country hidden in a grain shipment. He'd been caught almost immediately and sent to the concentration camp at Buchenwald, where he'd endure the next 2 years until he was liberated by the Allied forces. You don't have to tell me what happened if you don't want to, I told him. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the gruesome details. He was unusually animated and persistent, though, promising it was something that needed to be said. He wanted to survive the ordeal if it hadn't been for a friend he'd met there, one of the Nazi officers, a Rotenführer squad leader, had taken special interest in him because of their strictly similarity in age and appearance. The two would sit on either side of the barbed wire fence, swapping stories about their childhood. My grandfather would talk about my grandmother, how beautiful she was, and how he wouldn't give up until he found her again. The SS officer had gone straight from Hitler Jugend, or the Hitler Youth Group, to the army and had never been intimate with a woman. He became engulfed in my grandfather's tales of romance, and the two became close friends despite the circumstances. The officer twice spared my grandfather's name from work assignment that meant certain death, and he'd often slip extra rations through the fence which my grandfather would then distribute to other prisoners. It wasn't a good life, but it was life, and that was good, my grandfather said. Things changed as the war began drawing to an end. The Nazi officers became increasingly paranoid and desperate as the Allied forces moved in. It became common practice for lower ranking officers to be held as scapegoats when impossible work orders were not met. Besides that, the rumor that the Rotenführer was protecting my grandfather put him in a dire position with his own officers. Faced between protecting my grandfather and his own life, the officer signed the order for my grandfather to be sent to a nearby armaments factory. 18-hour workdays, starvation rations, and no medical attention. The factory might as well have been a death sentence. 3 month survival rate was less than 50%. In the name of love, my grandfather pleaded, let him survive and find her again. She was waiting for him in America. The officer was moved, but his decision was final. His only compromise was to record the address of where she went and send her a letter to let her know what had happened to him. So, how did you survive? I asked. Did he change his mind? Were you rescued from the factory? Shielded from the worst of the camp by the officer, the transition to the factory proved too difficult for a young farmer. He didn't last the first week. What do you mean, didn't last? How'd you get out? The exertion of the long story was taking its toll on my grandfather. He coughed and wheezed, struggling to draw breath for several seconds before clearing his throat a final time. On April 11, 1945, the Buchenwald camp was liberated. Many of the Nazis had already abandoned their position and fled into the country. Others decided to lock themselves inside, pretending to be prisoners themselves, so Allied forces would have mercy on them. This was especially convincing for those who had taken time to get to know the prisoners and could assume their identities. When the SS officer gave the information and address of his lost love, he was allowed to board the next transport ship returning from America to be reunited with her. The gears in my head were turning, turning, and then stopped. Your grandmother was suspicious at first when I met her, but she accepted that the war had changed me. Besides, I knew so many stories about her that she couldn't deny our shared history. I raised his boy as my own and lived the life he dreamed of every night until his death. Do you think your real grandfather would forgive me if he ever knew? I didn't have an answer for him then, and I didn't get another chance. He died in his sleep that night after a long and happy life that wasn't his. Number 3. I'm sure no one will believe this, but that's okay. I'm originally from Germany, and growing up right next to the Alps was quite the experience. There were three houses in my area: mine, my friend Dominic's, and Marcus. Dominic, Marcus, and I are all about the same age and shared the same hobbies. We all enjoyed our hobby of hiking up the mountains the most. From our hiking experiences, we were very familiar with certain parts of the Alps, especially smaller mountains that didn't compare to the harsh conditions of the higher peaks in the Alps. Still, my mother would get mad at us for going up there. She would always tell us the stories about Die Schneermanner. Now, I know those were just stories to keep us out of the mountains. I'm not sure why she told them. It was an extremely peaceful place to hike. Still, me and my friends would go off there to play hide and seek. I should mention that we were all around 15 or 16 at the time. I know. We're a little too old to play hide and seek, but all we had to do besides build snow forts. Trust me, building snow forts gets pretty old quickly. One morning, I woke up to the gloomiest day I'd ever seen in my life. The smell of a freshly cut stack of ash wood led me to realize that my father had just returned from cutting our firewood. As I got out of bed and started through the house, we heard a sharp knock at the door. Usually, a knock at the door this early in the area meant trouble. My father peered out the window and let me know my friends were outside. Dominic and Marcus dusted off their boots as they came inside and asked if I wanted to go into the mountains. However, my mother wasn't having any of that. She explained it was too early and fretted on about the thick fog that enveloped most of the outside. Mothers always worry. Luckily, my father walked in the room and said, "He's a kid, let him go have fun with his friends." My mom hesitated and said it was okay. On my way to the door, I heard a whisper from my mom talking to my dad. She mumbled something about Die Schneemanner. I knew she did that on purpose, but I was a little too old to be bluffed by her childish stories, especially ones about Die Schneemanner. Die Schneemanner, shaking my head. A full head above the tallest man, she would say, with gray patches of fur, but mostly hairless, she would add. Oh, also, Die Schneemanner doesn't walk, he crawls. Skin is white as snow. He takes unwary hunters and children off to an old cave system. Yeah, it was a story made up to scare kids, if there ever was one. Still, I packed my bag with my flashlight, compass, water, and gun. It was common to carry firearms on a hike. There are all kinds of predatory animals in the area. I tucked a 9mm into my bag. It was a gun I shared with my father. Marcus and Dominic carried pistols as well. However, they kept theirs on hip holsters. We hurriedly made off outside for our daily dose of adventure. Oh, I wonder if Die Schneemanner is going to get you, Dominic said sarcastically. Shut up, Dominic, I scolded. I wasn't in the mood for jokes and was trying to pay attention to the trail we were on, seeing as how we were 3 hours away from the house, and it would be getting dark soon. It's so easy to get lost in the area if you aren't paying attention. We finally made it into a large clearing that looked like a perfect spot for flashlight hide and seek. Looking back now, I know that was a bad idea. As the sun sank behind the mountains and darkness fell, it began snowing like I had never seen. The snow became blinding as the wind picked up and began its eerie howling through the trees. Still, I was the seeker in our flashlight game. Marcus already ran off, disappearing into the blinding snow, screaming and laughing like a maniac. He was the clown in our group. Suddenly, Marcus's laughter turned into a serious voice, a voice that said, "Oh my God, come here." As we ran over to where the sound of the voice seemed to be coming, We found Marcus touching the ground and explaining to us how it feels weird and spongy. I had to feel it for myself. It was hard to explain, but my foot just sunk into the soft ground in that spot. Weird, I thought. Marcus had put both hands down on the spongy spot and began to lift something up. When he flipped it over, the side uncovered with snow showed the remains of the dog. Marcus jumped to his feet, and we all took a couple steps back. The dog had gashes and cuts all down its side. However, there was no blood. Whatever killed it must not have been too hungry. I could tell it hadn't been eaten on. Probably a bear, Marcus said. Couldn't have been, I explained. A bear would have at least eaten some of it. Bears don't just kill for fun. As soon as those words came out of my mouth, the most terrifying roar echoed down the mountain. It was a deep, guttural sound that raised the hair on all of our necks. Maybe that was a hunter's call, Dominic asked, trying to seem sensible. I've heard all kinds of animals and calls in this area before, but this sound was new to me. Still, I wanted to believe Dominic. I wanted to reason with myself that it was some hunter's call. We stood silently, staring at the shadow of the mountain, half hidden in the blinding snow, while keeping our ears attentive to listening for any kind of sound at all. I couldn't decide if the faint sound I was hearing was tree branches snapping or just the howl of the wind. You guys hear that? Marcus asked. It sounds like trees breaking. The sound became louder, as if something were making its way towards us. Something that we couldn't see, but apparently could see us. Something massive and moving fast. I noticed Marcus standing on my left with his handgun drawn, so I slipped my hand into my bag and grabbed my revolver. Taking it out, I pulled the lever back and held it up into the night air. As I looked to my left to ask Marcus what he was hearing, he was quickly pulled off his feet backwards, screaming into the dark. The flash of his gun lit up the night air 3 times, and his faint voice could be heard screaming, "Help, I don't want to die." Dominic and I ran toward the flashes. The scene we encountered let me know that the stories my mother told me had been true all along. Marcus was stumbling and scrambling away from a cave while trying to stand on his own 2 feet. The cave entrance stood a creature like I'd never seen before. As I aimed my revolver, the creature turned. I shot it close to the spine. "Get to the tree stands," Marcus said as we tried to help him along in the dark. As we were climbing the ladder to the stand, I felt a tug at my pants. I looked down to see these long, bony fingers and hooked claws. I knew what they had meant in the movies about seeing your own life pass before your eyes whenever someone had an experience, a close encounter with death. A hooked claw sank into my leg as I leaned forward and put my revolver point blank to the creature's eye and squeezed the trigger. As the thing released its grasp, the noise bellowing from its mouth resembled a wolf howl, pig's squeal, and a crow's caw blended into one sound. It's hard to explain, but I'll never forget it. My leg left a trail of blood back to the large metallic stand, perhaps from the cold or from shock. I remember panicking to my friends that I could not feel my leg. Dominic cut a square from his shirt and used it to bandage the exposed tears around my ankle. We knew we had to make a run for it. Marcus and I were both injured, so Dominic was much faster. Marcus and I prayed and tried to help each other down the trails. We fired off the rest of the rounds we had behind us into the dark just to scare off anything that might have tried to follow us out. As we got to the base of the mountain, we met my father, and his shotgun silhouetted from the light of my family's cabin. He had heard the shots and was coming to look for us. We had explained that Dominic had ran ahead. My father rushed off to the only place he thought Dominic might have found shelter, at his house. On his return, my father explained nothing was at Dominic's house. I do mean nothing. The house was ransacked, with broken windows, doors hanging from their hinges. Trails of blood traced a path from the back door into the dark incline of the mountain base. My father called the police. It's difficult in this area for anyone to get the police to come out on a call because of our location. It took nearly 2 hours. They took some pictures and scribbled some statements from all of us. They made it clear that this would be filed as a home invasion. They said it was probably some trappers in the area who were looking to rob someone for food and supplies. We knew better. I explained to the police what we had been through. One of the officers turned to me coldly and stated, "I said it was a home invasion from trappers. Do you understand?" Marcus and I still live in this area. We often wonder what happened to Dominic, but it's always made clear to us that we didn't need to ask questions. One thing for sure, we never played flashlight hide and seek anymore. Number 4. My name is Paul. I'm 26 years old. I live in northern Germany, and I'm probably the last person who would believe a ghost story. I'm afflicted with schizophrenia, an often misunderstood illness in which causes your senses to play tricks on you. You see, hear, and sometimes even smell things that are simply not there. I'm certain that the thing that has started following me a month ago is not a hallucination, but I would never blame anyone for doubting this. The way the disorder plays out is very different for everyone that is afflicted by it. For me, it started when I was 10 years old. It was then that I started seeing people, people without faces. By now, I know they're not real and have gained a lot of control over my mind. But back when it first started, and especially for a 10-year-old kid, it was confusing and terrifying. My first thought was that these are demons who are haunting me. I was afraid that something was wrong with me or that I was evil, which made me suffer in silence for a long time. My father is a very religious, spiritual, and highly ambitious man. When I finally managed to gain the courage to tell him of my symptoms, he called my hallucinations visions and told me I was chosen by God. He and his community abused my gift for profit and status. They told people that the faceless entities I was seeing were spirits and sold my mental illness as a spiritual situation. Many people bought into these delusions, me unfortunately being one of them. As the faceless people showed up more and more frequently, my grip on reality got weaker every day. The result of my father's power trip and his more than questionable parenting technique was my first psychotic episode, during which I was completely separated from reality and fully believing I was sent to Earth by God. Eventually, my father's lust for power destroyed their cult and their community collapsed. He abandoned me immediately, and I finally stopped believing his lies. My mother took me in, even though I called her a blasphemer and cut all contact with her just a month ago when she suggested that I might talk to a therapist. She sent me to see an incredible psychologist and taught me critical thinking skills. Finally, I began to understand the difference between things that are possible and things that are impossible. Although the things I see and hear still feel very much real to me, I slowly managed to get connected to reality again. It was then that I was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. I was 14 years old and had to deal with what most people would consider their worst nightmare, not being able to trust your own mind. Every single thing I see or hear, I have to question. Without the skills and abilities my mother and years of therapy have taught me, and without her limitless patience and acceptance, I undoubtedly would have spiraled into a deeper and deeper psychosis. I soon found out what the end of the spiral looks like. Since schizophrenia is hereditary, I asked around my family whether or not anyone had experienced similar things, and sure enough, someone had. My grandmother told me about some of our family who got left behind in the Netherlands when they immigrated to Germany. My great uncle Lars. No one in my family ever talked about him before, and I doubt many even know his name. At the time, neither the understanding nor medication existed that he desperately needed. He ended his life when he was 22, alone, insane, and terrified. As I got better, I refused to end up like him or define myself through my illness. Through a lot of hard work and after many terrifying nights, I built myself a strong support system of friends, found a loving and wonderful girlfriend, and am heading down to an exciting career path. I'm happy to say that, since my first one at 14 years old, I have not had a single psychotic break. I'm telling you all of this so you know that I'm not some complete nutcase with no connection to reality, as most schizophrenics are often portrayed in the media. I need you to believe me. I need someone to believe me, even though I understand why they won't. Because a month ago, I've started seeing something new. The first time I saw him, he was in me and my girlfriend's garden. It was late at night and we were about to go to bed. I was preparing my medication calendar for the next week when I spotted something in the corner of my eye. Outside of our bedroom window, in a bush in our garden, a face was staring at me. I immediately recoiled. While I still occasionally hallucinate, even with the shit ton of antipsychotic medication I'm on, I have never seen a face before. My girlfriend noticed me going quiet, staring out the window, and asked me what was wrong. I asked her whether she sees someone in our garden or not. She looked through our window for a long time, checking the entirety of the property before telling me she couldn't see anyone. When I checked again, he was gone. I locked the door to ease my paranoia and tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong, but the terror wouldn't leave me. They had never had a face. Ever since then, he came back again and again. In the beginning, I only saw him at night, and infrequently at that, but now I see him everywhere, all the time, every day. Always from a distance, always staring straight at me. Even when I was out with friends for coffee, I could find him someplace where only I could see him. I tried showing him to other people, and I tried taking a picture of him, but whenever anyone but me attempted to see him, or I tried to take a picture, he would disappear. This has never happened with any of my other delusions. When I am unsure whether what I'm seeing or not is a hallucination, I always just take a photo. Obviously, hallucinations can't be photographed, and seeing that they're not in the pictures allows me 100% confidence that they're not real. But he seems to know when someone else but me could potentially see him and avoids it like the plague. In a desperate attempt, I carefully tried to bring up the possibility that he might be real to my girlfriend, but she just looked at me with a worried look, and I knew it was hopeless. Same with my friends. Everyone assumed I was heading straight down to a new psychotic episode. Tired of the worried looks my friends kept giving me, I stopped talking about him, but I knew they could still see me seeing him, not paying proper attention, staring at something no one else could see but me. My career, my personal life, and my relation all suffered greatly. I couldn't concentrate and had frequent panic attacks. His face was all that I could think about. Everything I worked so hard to gain was slipping away from me. I felt alienated, hopeless, and worst of all, entirely alone. Eventually, it became clear to me that no matter what this thing is, it can never be as horrifying as the future that awaits me if I continue down this path. I decided to confront it. A week ago, I searched for him outside of our bedroom window. I had no trouble finding him. There he was in that same bush I first saw him in. I told my girlfriend that I needed some fresh air and would go on a walk. She was about to protest but stopped herself. Instead, she just sighed and told me to be careful. The worry in her voice was obvious. After going outside, I waited until the lights in our bedroom window switched off before heading into our garden. He was still there in the bush looking straight at me. As always, adrenaline was rushing through my body. I could feel my heart beat fast in my chest and sweat roll down my face, even while standing in our snow coated garden. But I knew I couldn't live like this any longer, and that thought was enough to overcome my intense terror. As I got closer, I managed to get a better look at him for the first time. He looked young, younger than me, and was wearing a ragged, cheap looking outfit. When I was less than 2 meters away from him, he moved back a bit into the bushes. The expression on his face surprised me. It seemed insecure, almost frightened. He opened his mouth and said something I didn't understand. He sounded drunk. None of my hallucinations have ever spoken before. I asked him to repeat himself, and when he spoke again, I realized he wasn't drunkenly slurring his speech as I first thought. He was speaking Dutch. Confusion managed to overpower my fear. I slowly asked him who he is in German, hoping that the German words are similar to Dutch words. Never having learned the language myself, he pointed at himself and spoke more Dutch. I only understood the last word he said, but that was enough. Lars.